you want to be creative in your own life, you need to at least be willing to take the stance that you have complete responsibility for everything that occurs. It doesn't mean that you are completely responsible. It means thinking as if you were. Because when you think as if you are completely responsible, you can start to see, okay, what did I do that contributed to this outcome? What things might I do differently in the future? And I'm going to guess that that has something to do with mindfully creating a fulfilling relationship. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Rich in Relationship. And today we're going to talk about mindfully creating a fulfilling relationship. And to help with this process, we've got Emily Elizabeth, who has the podcast, What Fulfills You Today. Thank you for coming, Emily. How are you?
Thank you for having me. I'm doing well today, and I'm happy to be here.
Did I read that right? Is it what fulfills you today?
Yeah, what fulfills you? I mean, that's usually just the ultimate question I'm always asking, what fulfills you? But yeah, it's what fulfills you.
This
Podcast, what
concept
fulfills
of
you?
fulfillment is awesome because you get so many different answers about it. Oh, what, $1 million? Well, that's not enough anymore. $10 million, that would fulfill me. Or, just having someone who loves me would be fulfilling, or having the job of my dreams, or becoming a world-renowned figure skater, or whatever. Like it's crazy, all the different ideas of fulfillment that are floating around out there. The question I ask everyone is, how did your heart lead you to this work?
Yeah. Well, to no surprise, it was related to a relationship. And this was when I was in college. So, about the full 4 years, I was in a relationship. And at the time, about halfway through the relationship, we had a period of being broken up for about 7, 8 months. And that was a time that was very difficult for me. It was my first serious relationship, first time going through a lot of emotional adversity, a lot of which I didn't know how to handle. And so at that time too, I had other elements of life that made it really difficult for me to feel happy, to feel motivated. And I reflected deeply, besides the break in this relationship. At the time, I didn't know if we were going to get back together, but I was, besides that, like, why do I feel this way? And I instantly knew I was kind of pulling together, okay, if I had all the money tomorrow, would that make a difference? If I had this tomorrow, if I didn't have this, etc. And the one element that I noticed that I was really lacking in, and I remember a high school teacher had mentioned it in class as well, but it was around the depth of our connection in our relationships. And I lacked that a lot at the time. I was 20 years old. I didn't have a lot of close friends. I had lost my partner at the time, because and I think to what most people kind of do in the early stages of relationship, I had put a lot of eggs in that basket. So I feel like when that was torn apart for the 7, 8 months, I felt very empty and alone. And I think when I was trying to improve myself during that period to get outside of myself, I recognized that our life fulfillment truly comes from the connections that we have. And that was when I decided, I was listening to Tony Robbins at the age of 20 in my apartment in California. And I was like, there should be someone that is more a couple years older than me, like a bigger sister who's talking about these topics. And that's why I decided to do it, because I needed that myself.
I love it. And you know what I love is that most people, when they're in the breakup and they go to why am I not fulfilled, it's usually because that other person was such a jerk. And
Mm.
I kind of love it. Well, I'm sure you had those feelings because we all do. I can't believe
Mhm.
them. But it
Mm.
sounds like somehow you wended your way through that stuff to what was really important.
Yeah, I believe in that you control, you have your locus of control, you control that side. And I always believe that at the very least, there are things that I could be better in. So, usually there are things that other people can contribute to it, but there's always something that I can do to at least improve the situation on my end. That's my mindset.
Yeah, I was taught. I did this training when I was about in my 20s, actually, called
Mhm.
LifeSpring, which was derivative from EST, and EST is now Landmark, and Tony Robbins and all that stuff. It all comes out of the same uh, core philosophy, which I'm not going to get into because I could talk about that for about 4 hours. So that's another
Mhm.
podcast, another day. But I remember what they taught us there that never left me was what they called the stance of accountability. And
Mm.
basically, the stance of accountability stems from the idea that if you want to be creative in your own life, right? And that's really what we're talking about, creating a fulfilling relationship. If you want to be creative in your own life, you need to at least be willing to take the stance that you have complete responsibility for everything that occurs. It doesn't mean
Mhm.
that you are completely responsible. It means thinking as if you were. Because when you
Right.
think as if you are completely responsible, you can start to see, okay, what did I do that contributed to this outcome? What things might I do differently in the future? And I'm going to
Mhm.
guess that that has something to do with mindfully creating a fulfilling relationship.
Exactly, exactly. It's something that I was looking at in terms of what could I have done better? Where can I take accountability? And like I said, I really see it as I take full accountability of my actions in my life. And that means in the future, I with this awareness, I can also do better, be a better partner, be a better friend, colleague in future obstacles.
So let's say that we are the average rich in relationship podcast listener, which is probably someone who understands this idea, but maybe emotionally they're having trouble buying into it, right? Because they've gotten out of a bad relationship or they're in a relationship that's not working and they feel a little bit not at cause in their life, even though they would
Mhm.
like to be. It's like, what's the
Mm.
first step to mindful to get into the mindful part?
For me, from my experience, I would say the first step is to actually look within to see where, honestly, where you went wrong. If it's regarding a breakup or something of that nature, looking at what you could have done better. Having the self-awareness of your own I don't like to call it weaknesses, but rather maybe skills or traits that you could improve on.
Mhm.
That's exactly the step that I took when I was 20. I said, "These are traits that I would not like to maintain. I would like to diminish them as low as possible, and these are other traits I want to bring out more in me." And
Nice.
once I was aware of that, I decided to seek out more people that had the traits that I wanted to adapt more of in order to become more of those things.
So cool. So it sounds like what part of what we want to do is to take an inventory
Mhm.
of where our strengths or our weaknesses and hint listeners very often our strengths are our weaknesses. It just depends on where we're applying them and how. So we
Exactly.
want to take that inventory and then what?
And then I would say, I for me, I again, I can only speak from personal experience, is is practice it over time, right? And also check in with yourself. Are you actually implementing, like let's say at the time, I remember I didn't feel like I was the most integrable person. I was just still very childish, had a lot of immature tendencies. And so I would say, okay, I want to be surrounded by a lot of people that have very strong integrity and honesty in what they do in their practice every day. So I would observe myself over time, over a month, over 3 months, like, what have you done differently? How do you feel differently? And I would also ask some friends along the way too, I would ask them to kind of quote unquote audit me in a way. I'd be like, hey, what's one area or one thing I do, maybe it annoys you, bothers you. What is one thing that you could be really honest and transparent about that I could improve on? I would ask them, every 6 months, a year, just like different types of friends that I knew would be willing to be honest about that.
I got it. That's all. There's so much in that. So I'm just going to roll this back. So the first part might be a willingness to look at your life as if you are at cause. The next part would be to look at your strengths and weaknesses and see how can I grow my strengths or um, lean into them more. And then I heard this really important piece, which is it goes back to that saying, you are as effective as the five people you spend the most time with. So really surround
Mhm,
yourself with people who have the quality that you want to develop. But I also heard something about friends there, right? Which is really
mhm,
this is one I get into with people all the time. What's a friend? Oh, someone that you go out to coffee with. But what I heard actually was the you want a kind of friend or a quality of friend who's going to hold you accountable. And so there's some
mhm,
understanding there that that when Emily and I go out for coffee and I say X, Y, and Z, Emily's going to say, "Well, it doesn't sound like you really owned Y." And I have to be
mhm.
willing to hear that instead of screw you, I'm never going to talk to you again. Like if I'm not willing to receive it, then that relationship can't happen.
Exactly. And that's actually something I point out a lot as well on my podcast, in that if if you are not willing to give feedback to your friend and vice versa, are you really being a friend to that person, right? And again, it is how you communicate it as well, but it is important to not beat around the bush, so to speak, or to try to cater to that person just so you don't want to hurt their feelings. I think if you are a real friend to someone that you do genuinely want them to be better in their life and vice versa, you would want your friend to tell you and have a dialogue about that.
Now, these sound like great life practices. Forget relationships. Wait
Mhm.
for a second. But also for the listeners, I want to point out that when we talk about a relationship, we're not necessarily talking about, your soulmate or your true love or your partner. It could be any kind of relationship. In fact, this might even be a relationship with yourself. In fact, some people might even argue that it starts there. So,
Mhm.
how do we take this frame that you've given us and start to apply
Mhm.
it to relationships? Stance of accepting that we're causal, sort of inventorying who we are, what our strengths and weaknesses are, surrounding
Mhm.
ourselves with people who are encouraging and help us build ourselves up, being willing to give and receive
Mhm.
feedback. How do you like that? How do we take that and how does it connect to the relationship piece?
Yeah. I think everything comes in practice, right? You'll never get it perfect the first time around, but I think
What?
you
Wait, what? You mean I'm always learning?
Of
I,
course,
like I'm half joking. I
I
childishly
know.
think that I'm always going to get it right the first time.
Right, right. And I think everything is a learning process. However, I think it's important to take inventory every time of, like, are you applying what you say you want to apply, right? If you are aware that you need to ask feedback from a friend, for example, if you want to learn maybe some of your blind spots, are you willing then for the next time you meet for coffee or dinner with a friend or group of friends, are you willing to bring that into topic and ask them? So I think it's just implementing them as an action. I think that's usually some of the steps that a lot of people miss, is they
Hmm?
are aware of these things, but now they don't go and take action and do it and get into practice. And as a former athlete, it's very familiar for me because I know that in order to do the jump or to have a better stroke, I have to practice it and not do so great the first few times, or maybe not feel comfortable the first few times.
Yeah, I love that. I'm going to actually throw in a fact for our listeners that the unconscious mind, which is like 90% of who you are, whether you
Mhm.
know it or not, it doesn't know the difference between imaginary and real, right? And so,
Mhm.
the way this has been proven is there have been studies done on basketball players where set of basketball players were practicing their free throws, another set
Mhm.
was imagining they were practicing their free throws, and the third set was like up smoking dope or whatever, like
Mhm.
whatever they were doing. It had nothing to do with free throws. Maybe they were
Mhm.
ice skating. I'm stuck on ice skating because Emily Elizabeth used to be an ice skater, and that's like one of my favorite things, by the way.
Yeah.
Like so graceful, so amazing, and so much to learn there. So anyway, the result of the study was that, of course, the basketball players who were actually practicing free throws improved, pretty incredibly.
Mhm.
Group that wasn't doing anything that had to do with free throws, they didn't get any better. They might have gotten worse. But the group that was imagining,
Mhm.
using the same amount of time to imagine that they were practicing free throws, actually improved almost as much as the group that was actually practicing free throws. Like, how
Mm.
freaky is that? And it's because our
Yeah.
mind just doesn't know the difference. And so, this thing of practicing, and allowing yourself to imagine is really important.
Mm. Yeah.
Imagining what's the relationship I want to have and
Mhm.
practicing it. What would that look like?
Mhm. And I like that too, because I am a firm believer in that, when you think of something constantly, when you are constantly envisioning it, whether it's good or bad, is somehow slowly manifests itself into your life and into your own reality. So I think that's why I'm also very mindful about what I am thinking about, trying to be as aware as possible and trying to practice the different techniques that I do implement, which is around mindfulness.
Yeah, and here's something else is that our unconscious mind cannot distinguish between a negative and a positive. And what I mean by that is if I
Mhm.
say to you, Emily Elizabeth, that's like one of my favorite names, by the way.
Mhm.
It makes me think of
Mm.
Clifford the Big Red Dog.
Yeah, everyone says
He
that.
he is my he is my poster child for what my unconscious mind is like,
Mhm.
large and caring and smart. but big, like he's got
Mm-hmm.
to watch where he steps. What we know about marriages with children here at Rich in Relationship is inevitably we slip into parallel lives or roommate mode because we're like managing the crew, managing those kids. Well, we've got a solution for you. We've got a special free book for you that's going to give you 7 tips on how to reignite intimacy and passion in your relationship and get back on the same page. And it's easy to get. It's free. Go to bit.ly/7 savers, the number 7 and the word savers all together, no spaces. bit.ly/7 savers. If I say to you, don't think about Clifford the big red dog, what do you do?
Mm-hmm. I will think about it.
Right. So the unconscious mind, all it hears is big red dog. It doesn't hear
Mm-hmm.
don't, it doesn't hear do. And so part of being mindful is
Mm-hmm.
is getting that whatever you think of, if you're saying, I'm not going to have a, pardon my language, folks, I'm not going to have a fucked up relationship this time.
Mm-hmm.
All your
Yeah.
unconscious mind hears is fucked up
Right.
relationship.
Right.
Right. So
Right.
you wanna be a part of being mindful is imagining what is an unfucked relationship look,
Mm-hmm.
or what does a fulfilling relationship look like? Really imagining
Yeah.
it and being there. And as you point out, practicing those qualities. And who can you practice those qualities with?
I think you can practice them with every person that you come across, quite frankly. You know what I mean? Relationships are relationships. What you do becomes who you are. So it becomes a habit. And so how you treat people, how you respond to people, how you communicate. I think, of course, it has different flows when it's in a romantic setting and in a professional setting. But nonetheless, I think there's a lot of similarities that cross over just in who you are as your energy and your character and how people describe you. I think that becomes very parallel across the board.
So true. I do a lot of work with couples in conflict, or
Mm.
people who are divorcing someone that's toxic on the other side, and they're really worried
Mhm.
about triggering them. And so, really a sort of common mental health exercise for people to communicate so that they're less triggering to the other person is to use what's called I statements. So instead of
Mhm.
saying, Emily Elizabeth, every time you drink water, that makes me so mad, what I would
Yes.
say, that which is blaming. And also by
Yes.
saying it makes me so mad, I'm giving you the power to make me mad every time you take a sip of water, right?
Right.
It's kind of crazy when you think about it. Using an I statement, I would say, I feel so angry when I see you taking a sip of water because I'm thirsty too, and you didn't offer me any, or whatever the reason is, right?
Mhm.
That's a
Mhm.
completely different way of speaking, but they find it challenging to do that with somebody that they're in a very intense relationship with. So I tell
Right.
them, go practice it at the grocery store.
Right.
Go practice it with someone who doesn't matter. And if you screw it up, then it doesn't matter because they're just like,
Right.
Okay, whatever.
Right.
Practice it with the Domino's delivery person.
Mhm.
Practice.
Mhm.
And that's what's cool is you can take the thing that you're struggling with in an important relationship and practice it
Mhm.
in places where it doesn't matter at all until you get comfortable with
Exactly.
it.
Exactly. Exactly. And I believe everything's about repetition, like the more you do something, it just becomes a habit of who you are. So that's why I think it's important to like be reflective and introspective each time, every week, every month, just to kind of see, have I been practicing the things that I say I want to practice, or am I working towards becoming more of a person I would like to be described as? That's something I use heavily too, is I used to write down what would I like people to describe me as to a stranger. If a stranger asked a friend of mine, "How would you describe Emily Elizabeth?" What would I want that friend to say? Like, what would be the first instinct that comes to mind, like first few words? So that's something I replay in my mind a lot, is like, do I think this friend would describe me as such?
Nice, nice. Oh, and
Mhm.
that's so perfect. But before I ask you the question that I ask everyone at the end, I want to make sure people can find you in your podcast because I think you have a great message. How can people find you?
Yeah, it's on all podcast platforms. So it is on Apple, Spotify, Google, YouTube, everywhere. It's just called What Fulfills You, and you'll be able to find it.
Is there any other way that people should look for you, or is the podcast the thing?
The podcast is, I would say, the primary. I'm on Instagram, social media. It's
Nice,
just part of
nice.
my generation. So you can find What Fulfills You on
Hey,
Instagram. It's just What
even I'm on
Fulfills You.
Instagram, but you know what? The thing I haven't figured out yet is, believe it or not, I have friends who are younger than me who say, you should just, I don't do text. You should just ping me on Instagram. And I'm like, why
Oh.
would I do that? But I do it,
Yeah.
right? It's like, why wouldn't I just text you? But for
Mhm.
whatever reason, they're reverse to that.
Oh,
Like
wow.
Instagram is the thing for them.
Oh, I try my best to stay off as much as possible, even though it's part of work. I like to be mindful of my time.
Amen. Mindful is the key word for the day. And the question I ask at the end of the podcast that's so appropriate with your last statement. What is the legacy that you want to leave behind?
I would like to be able to have made an impact on younger women, specifically around changing their framework and mindset on how they approach their day-to-day life, but especially their relationships, because I think at some point, whether anyone has realized it or not, you will realize that relationships and connections are the core of your fulfillment in life. So wherever you go, you can try to run, you can try to leave a different environment, but wherever you go, that lack of connection will always go with you. So I think it's important to build that and be mindful of it.
Yeah, a great episode for this podcast would be around learning to hang out with yourself versus like mindfully creating a fulfilling relationship with yourself,
Mhm.
how that impacts mindfully creating a fulfilling relationship with others. Because I think a mistake certainly that I've made many times in my life, I won't speak for the rest of humanity, is
Mhm.
trying to find uh, myself in someone else, my
Mm.
fulfillment in someone else. So it's not from having a fulfilling relationship, I have found, is not so
Mhm.
much that the other person is fulfilling me as we
Yeah.
find the relationship to be, we experience the relationship as being
Mhm.
fulfilling. But that doesn't happen
Exactly.
until, one to one, what's going on between my own ears is fulfilling.
Exactly. Could not
Well,
agree
maybe
more.
we can do that like together,
Yes.
like another episode. All
Yes,
right. Thank you
certainly.
so much for coming on. I have really enjoyed you. Any last remarks?
No, I think that was this was really great conversation. Thank you so much for having me, and I think this is a great topic for people to think about, just how can we, be in tune with ourselves, but also apply that into future and current relationships so we can build more fulfilling and meaningful connection.
Great. Have an awesome day.